All right, everybody, get ready for Chapter 2, Lesson 2. We are on page 101. Woohoo, we broke 100. Now, in the last lesson, we're talking about decimals and fractions, and now we're going to talk about percents and fractions. So our learning objective, B, is I can write percents as fractions and fractions as percents. So those are the two things we're going to do. First, we're going to talk about how to write a percent in fraction form and simplify it. And then in the second part, we're going to talk about how to take a fraction and then write it as a percent. So we'll just do the opposite in the second part. All right, now just a reminder, the vocab word, percent. Percent is a ratio. So we talked about ratios in chapter 1. In a percent ratio, the denominator is always 100. So you're comparing a number to 100, and that number is the percent of 100. So if it was 25 over 100, it would be 25%. So a percent is a ratio with 100 as the denominator. Now, this is important to remember because when we're playing around with fractions and turning percents into fractions and fractions into percents, what number are we going to want in the denominator? 100. All right, so we want to look at this real world link just to kind of get a feel for what a percent is. Let's look at this. It says students were asked to choose their favorite sport to play. Number 1, for each sport, shade a 10 by 10 grid that represents the number of students that chose the sport. So this is a 10 by 10 grid, which means there are 100 little squares in there. So we're talking about truly out of 100. However, for basketball, it's talking about 3 out of 20. See how these lines are darker? So this is 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So there are 5 sets of 20. Now, if 3 out of every 20 basketball players are what we're shading, then you would want to shade 3 in each of these sections of 20. Now, 3 out of 20 is how many out of 100? That's what we want to do in number 2. What fraction with a denominator of 100, write with a denominator of 100 to represent the number of students who chose each sport? So what's the fraction, basically, is what this is asking, with 100 in the denominator? Well, there are 100 boxes, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. So 15 out of the 100, 3 out of 20 is equivalent to 15 out of 100. So that's what we put down here. And just remember, when you have 100 in the denominator, this is the percent. So this would be 15%. Let's look at this one, 3 out of 25. So this is 100 boxes, but it's divided into 4, so each section has 25. So if you think 3 out of 5 chose football, or 3 out of 25, 3 out of 25 chose football, 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12 out of 100. So 3 out of 25 is equivalent to 12 out of 100. Think times 4 times 4. So if you say football, 12 out of 100 people chose football, that would be 12% chose football. How many chose gymnastics? 1 out of 20. So we're dividing this 100 into 5 sets of 20 again. If 1 out of 20 choose gymnastics, that's 5 out of 100. So 1 out of 20 equals 5 out of 100. Think 20 times 5, 1 times 5. They're equivalent fractions. So 5 out of 100 means what percent chose gymnastics? 5%. Swimming, 9 out of 100. So man, out of this whole thing, only 9 people chose swimming. 9 out of 100 already has 100 in the denominator. 9 out of 100 is what percent? 9%. So it's going to be crucial that we can get a 100 in the denominator so we can easily just say that the numerator is the percent. So that's what we're going to do in part 1 of this chapter. We're going to turn fractions into equivalent fractions with 100 in the denominator so we can say the percent. So 1/20th is 5%. If 1 out of 20 people like gymnastics, 5% of the people like gymnastics. That's what we're figuring out in this first part. Please turn to page 102. All right, let's go over this. Here's that definition again. A percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. So 45% is 45 out of 100. Written as a fraction, 45 over 100. On a model here with 100 squares, 45 squares are filled in to represent 45 out of 100. So this blue is 45%. Here's a bar diagram. So here's 100. Each section is 10%. 45 is shaded in. 45%. Now, this right here is key. This is what you're going to have to be able to know by the end to write in your reflection. I'm going to put a huge star and an arrow towards this. This is how you turn to write a percent as a fraction. So this is how to write a percent as a fraction. Here's the first thing you have to do. You have to write the percent as a rate per 100. So you're writing it as a fraction with 100 in the denominator. Then the second thing you do is simplify. So if you have a percent, write the percent with 100 in the denominator. Then simplify it. So watch. Write 50% as a fraction in simplest form. 50%, first you write it with 100 in the denominator. 50% is 50 with 100 in the denominator. Then, second step, simplify it. So, if you divide by 50, 50 divided by 50 is 1, 100 divided by 50 is 2, you get 1/2. 50% is 1/2. There it is in visual form. Half of the boxes are filled in. Let's look at this one. In a recent survey, 55% of cell phone owners said they text message. What fraction of cell phone owners is this? So you have 55%. Step 1 up here is you write it as a rate per 100. So you write it with 100 in the denominator, 55 over 100. Then you simplify it. So how do you simplify? You divide by the greatest common factor. Try dividing by 5. 55 divided by 5 is 11. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So 11 out of 20 cell phone owners text message. Let's do these ones together. 75%. Step 1, write it as a fraction with 100 in the denominator. Step 2, simplify it. You can divide by 25 on both of these. There you go. 3/4. Now that might have been one that you recognize as 75% is 3/4, because that's something that we talked about in the other chapter, or in the other lesson on that magical page right here. That 75 hundredths is something you might remember. Okay, so 3/4. All right, let's do 90%. Turn it into a ratio with 100 at the bottom. 90 over 100. Simplify. What if you divide by 10? That gives you 9 over 10, 9/10. All right, 38%. Turn it into the fraction with 100 in the denominator. Then simplify it. Okay, how can we simplify this? Divide by 2. Let's see if that'll take us to where we need to be. 38 divided by 2, 19. 100 divided by 2, 50. Can't divide those anymore. That's our answer. That's simplest form. So, there's one more example over here where you have to look at a chart. Let's do that. The table shows the percent of each movie type rented during a month. What fraction of the rentals were action movies? So just look at the chart. 35% were action movies. Change it into a fraction with 100 in the denominator, 35 over 100. Then simplify it. So what if you divide by 5? 35 divided by 5 is 7. 100 divided by 5 is 20. That's as simple as it can get. So action movies were rented 7 out of 20 of the time. Cool. Now let's do the practice. Write the fraction of rentals that were horror movies. Horror, 5%. Turn it into a fraction with 100 in the denominator. Simplify it. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 100 divided by 5 is 20. They were rented 1 out of 20 times, 1/20th of the time. That was the horror movies. Okay, so remember in this first part, you're taking a percent, you turn it into a fraction with the denominator of 100, and then you simplify. That's your simplified fraction. Now we're going to do the opposite. So we're going to start with a fraction and turn it into a percent. So here it is, everybody. This is the big thing that you're going to need to know in your reflection. To write a fraction as a percent, find an equivalent ratio with 100 as a denominator. So this is our big thing. This is what we need to do. We need to find an equivalent ratio with 100 in the denominator. Because if we can get a 100 in the denominator, then the numerator is the percent. So if you have a 100 down here, whatever this number is, that is your percent number. Let's see how we did it here. Example 4, write the fraction 6/8 as a percent. Now, this is just like in lesson 1. When we're trying to take 6/8 and we're trying to write an equivalent fraction with a 100 in the denominator. Unfortunately, if you do 100 divided by 8, it's not a nice whole number. But if you simplify 6/8, divide by 2, you can get 3/4, and you can turn 3/4 into 100 because 4 times 25 is 100. So look at, we're setting up our equivalent fractions just like we did in chapter 1. 3/4, 4 times 25 is 100. 3 times 25 is 75. When you get this, 75 over 100, that right there is your percent. So this is 75%. 75% of this rectangle is full. 3/4 is 75%. All right, let's do this one. Okay, so it looks like we're going to end up with 3/4 again, but how does that happen? So you have 9 over 12, and you're trying to turn this into something over 100. This would be your percent. Now you can't easily do 100 divided by 12. It's 8.33, so you can't easily go from here to here. So you can simplify it first. 9 over 12, divide by 3, and you have 3 over 4. Now 3 over 4, again, just like up here, can turn into 100 by multiplying by 25. 75 over 100, 75%. So it's just the same thing as up here. Cool. All right, now if we turn the page, there's one more quick example before the guided practice. Here it is. This is page 104. Mitch made 12 out of 40 shots during the championship game. What percent of his shots did Mitch make? Okay, what percent did he make? So we know he made 12 out of 40. Now we've got to get 12 out of 40 equivalent to what is that out of 100. So watch what they did. You could simplify this to 3/10. So if you divide by 4 and divide by 4, you're going to get 3/10. Once you have 3/10, you can easily turn 10 into 100. 10 times 10 is 100. 3 times 10 is 30. 30 out of 100, there's our magic number. So this is the percent. So 30 out of 100 is 30%. So here's an example that we're going to do together. Alana spelled 19 out of 25 words correctly. What percent did she spell? Oh my gosh, you guys, this one's super easy because we can turn 25 into 100 right now. 25 times what is 100? Times 4. 19 times 4. What is that? Well, 20 times 4 is 80. And this is 19 times 4, so take away 4. So 9, 78, 77, 76. 76 out of 100 is 76% because a percent is compared to 100. So this ratio, 76%. Sweet. So this whole fraction to percent, percent to fraction thing goes a little bit quickly. Feel like this was a shorter lesson. Let's try the guided practice next. Again, we're on page 104, guided practice. Okay, on page 104, we're in chapter 2, lesson 2. We are going to do the guided practice. We're going to do 6 of these. They go kind of quick. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to do 1 through 6. In numbers 1, 2, and 3, you're going to write the percent as a fraction in simplest form. So let's remember, when you write a percent as a fraction, first you write it as a rate per 100. So you write it with a 100 in the denominator. Second, you simplify. So let's do it. 15%, let's write it with a 100 in the denominator. Next, we need to simplify. Well, you can't divide 100 by 15, but you can divide both by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3. 100 divided by 5 is 20. 3 and 20, you can't simplify that anymore. So 3/20ths is your simplified fraction. Try this one. Write 80% out of 100 and then simplify it. And then play the video and see if you did it like I did. So 80 out of 100, divide by 10, divide by 10, 8/10. Ooh, look at weight. You can divide that more. Uh-oh, I didn't divide by the greatest common factor. You know what? I should have divided by 20. Because look, now I need to simplify it more. Can divide by 2, divide by 2, 4/5. So I could have skipped this step here if I just would have done 80 over 100 and divided by 20, because 20 is the greatest common factor. So either way, your answer is 4/5. All right, 33%. Write it out of 100. Okay, here's the bad news. This can't be simplified any further. So I guess that's good news because you don't have to do any more work. All right, there you go. All right, so we just turned percents into fractions in simplest form. 4, 5, and 6, you need to write the fraction as a percent. So remember what we're trying to do from page 103. We're trying to find an equivalent ratio that has 100 as a denominator. So we want to set this up 3/10. How can you set up 3/10 to get 100 in the denominator? 10 times 10, 3 times 10, 30, 100. That's 30%. All right, what about 3/20ths? Let's see, can you turn 20 into 100? Pause it, see what you can do, and then play it and see if you did it like I did it. 20 times 5, 3 times 5 is 15 over 100, so it's 15%. All right, try this one. Pause it, do this one, turn it into a percent, and then play it and see if you did it like I did it. So 2 out of 5. Hey, this is pretty easy because we can get 5 right to 100. 5 times what is 100? 5 times 50. Oh, I'm not 5 times 50. 5 times 20. 5 times 20. 2 times 20. 5 times 20 is 100. 2 times 20 is 40. Shabam. 40%. All right. Your next step is page 105. Independent practice. So this is what you're going to do totally on your own now. Here are the ones I want you to do. I want you to do number 3 and 4. Write the percent as a fraction in simplest form. Do 7 and 8. write the fraction as a percent. Then let's do a couple of these story problems down here. They're pretty basic, you guys. Number 9 is like examples 1 through 3. So you're taking a percent and you're turning it into a fraction of simplest form. Number 12, this is, you have 42 out of 50. Oh, you have this ratio 42 out of 50 and you need to write it as a percent. All right, so go ahead and do those 6 problems on your own. You can do it. Okay, we are on page 105, chapter 2, lesson 2. This is checking the independent practice. Let's take a look at number 3. 85% is 85 over 100. Divide by 5, the greatest common factor, and you get 17 over 20. Can't be simplified anymore. 17/20ths is your answer. Number 4, 4% is 4 out of 100. Divide by 4, you get 1/25. There's your answer. Now we take in the fraction. We want to get 100 in the denominator. So set up equivalent fractions. 20 times 5 gets you 100. Do the same to the numerator. 7 times 5 is 35, so it's 35%. 11/25. Get 100 in the denominator by multiplying by 4. Multiply by 4. You get 44/100ths, 44%. All right, number 9. So in number 9, we have 28%. What's the fraction in simplest form? 28 over 100, divide it by 4, the greatest common factor, 7/25ths is your answer. And number 12, you have Cedric can get this ratio 42 out of 50. So what percent is that? 42 out of 50. If you multiply by 2, you can get 100 in the denominator, 84%. Cool. Your last step here is going to be the reflection and learning objective check-in in your math journal. All right, so what do we have in store for us for this lesson 2 reflection? Learning objective B says, I can write percents as fractions and fractions as percent. So we have 3 things going on here. First of all, the basics, the definition of percent. A percent is a ratio with a denominator of what? Write that number in there. Number 2, to write a percent as a fraction in simplest form, I need to. What were the 2 steps? There were 2 steps that we had on page 102 for what we had to do to write a percent as a fraction in simplest form. Then take those 2 steps and show an example of your work. How do you turn 65% into a fraction in simplest form? The last part is writing a fraction as a percent. So what do you need to do? It's just like what we had on page 103. What did we need to do to write a fraction as a percent? Then do an example. Now I'm going to be honest, this one is not one of the easy ones. You can't easily turn 60 into 100. You're going to have to simplify before you can turn this into 100. So you're going to have to do a couple steps. If you need a refresher, look at example 5 on page 104. It's very similar. All right, make sure that your teacher checks this reflection. And also when you're done, make sure that you do the learning objective check-in for objective B.